It's alive! It's alive! This is the No Fear podcast. We know what scares you.
I'm Matt,
And I'm Mel.
and this is the No Fear Cast, the podcast where we dissect horror and all the things that scare us. Since our last episode was on Lisa Frankenstein, and we are in the middle of spooky season, we decided that we will be looking at some other adaptations of Mary Shelley's classic tale.
All right, I'm going to start us off here. Listeners, I think you've probably already noticed because of the adjustment we had to make to our intro, Lisa was not able to join us this evening. And so you have Matt and me talking about some adaptations of Frankenstein, basically. Looking at our list, I have a couple books. Matt has a couple movies. So we've got a few. Well, I actually have a book and a graphic novel, and Matt has a couple movies. So we have multiple media covered here. And we don't want to spoil anything really, though a couple of these things you might have read or watched before, but not everybody will have, most likely. So this is going to kind of feel a little bit like one of our recommendation episodes, except we have a topic and we're just trying to suggest some cool stuff to check out if you're looking for spooky reading or watching and you enjoy Frankenstein. And I just want to say too, listeners, that if you just take a look around, like if you look up lists of Frankenstein inspired books and movies, there's a ton of stuff out there to check out. So this is definitely not exhaustive. And I'm sure Lisa would have had some really fascinating picks as well. So my first one I want to talk about is Kirsten White's The Dark Descent of Elizabeth Frankenstein, which I believe is a YA book. And though, I mean, I listened to the audiobook without knowing whether it was YA or whatever. And I wouldn't have said that if somebody had asked me, I suppose. But I saw later when I was looking up stuff about the book that it was, I think, marketed as YA. It came out in 2019. You might know Kirsten White from a few of her books that have gotten a lot of mention. So I heard a lot on podcasts about her book Hide. I think that was like a theme park horror. And I've seen a bunch on Instagram in the last bit about her Mr. Magic, a novel. I haven't gotten to either of those. I believe there's also like a Dracula book, Lucy Undying, but the Dark Descent of Elizabeth Frankenstein is the only one of her books I've read. Not because I don't want to read any more, but time and trying to read so much as a teacher and then for the podcast. Definitely her other books are on my radar. But The Dark Descent of Elizabeth Frankenstein was really fascinating to me. I believe Lisa had told me about it because I want to say we mentioned this in the book Monster She Wrote, or maybe we talked about it. It was mentioned on the podcast, but I know Lisa mentioned it to me. I looked into it, and I was like, this seems like something that I would be really interested in. And it is something I would be interested in because it's not just a retelling of Mary Shelley's Frankenstein. It's the thing that I love, which is the kind of behind the scenes or what was going on during your favorite classic novel in the background or with characters that didn't necessarily get fleshed out in the original. So the character of Elizabeth, uh, who did not get maybe as much fleshing out in the original book as people would have liked, I suppose. This is her book. This basically tells the story from her perspective. So it shares her origin, how she ends up with the Frankenstein family. There's some more about Justine in here. Um, this focuses on her relationship with Victor. And so you see his kind of mental state and his, I guess I'll say, way of being from her perspective. And one of the things I thought was really interesting that White does really well is not just the like behind the scenes, let's look at it from this character's perspective and embody them, but she also uses Elizabeth to um, discuss, I guess you would say, how what a woman's position in the time period was. So a lot of the many of the choices that Elizabeth makes are in order to protect herself, because as a woman in that society, and also with her origin, she had very limited options. And so you kind of see how she has to like live in the world and move through the world and create herself. And then those make some interesting parallels for what Victor is doing with his monster making. But at the beginning of the book, she's basically on her way to try to go to find him, because he has kind of dropped off the map after going away to school. And if you know the book, you know approximately where that is. And so, yeah, I enjoyed this. It got darker and darker as the book went on. And like I said earlier, there's some interesting stuff with the creature. So, yeah, if you're looking for kind of a reimagining or expansion, I guess you would say, of the original book, looking at some characters that maybe didn't get their full due, I suggest checking out Kirsten White's The Dark Descent of Elizabeth Frankenstein. And I also, if I remember right, I also enjoyed the audiobook as well. So if you like audiobooks, that could be a way to go. Matt, what is your first suggestion?
Well, my first suggestion is going to be I decided to go a little bit kind of off kilter or with more loose adaptations of Frankenstein. Perhaps this is a consequence of it being just the two of us. I decided I would go off the rails a little bit. But my first pick is the 1974 classic film directed by Mel Brooks called Young Frankenstein. And again, this movie is about what, 50 years old now. So I will still try to avoid spoilers for those of you that have not seen it. If you have not seen it, I highly recommend it. It's very, very funny. It's starring the great Gene Wilder as Dr. Victor Frankenstein, Peter Boyle as the monster. It also has Cloris Leachman, Marty Feldman, Madeline Kahn, Terry Garr, and a brief uncredited appearance by Gene Hackman. Uh, it's, I mean, it's a Mel Brooks movie. I mean, if you're not familiar with Mel Brooks, he is just he's a satirist, and so many of his movies are takes on specific genres or even movies, like riffs on particular movies themselves. But he's also done Spaceballs, which was a takeoff on Star Wars, along with just general sci-fi. Robin Hood, Men in Tights, Dracula Dead and Loving It. These are all some of his later works. He's also known for Blazing Saddles, the spoof of a Western. And I mean, he's just phenomenal, and he's absolutely hilarious. And what I think is a good sound reason, and I'm being serious with this, for why I included this, is that for its 40th anniversary in 2014, Mel Brooks actually said that he considers it his finest film that he has ever done as a writer director. And he was very clear to specify that it was his best work, his finest work, not necessarily his funniest work. So, I think him thinking so highly of this movie, as far as what he created and what they all created together, definitely speaks a lot, I think. But for those of you not familiar with the movie, again, I'll avoid spoilers in general, but it's a basic riff on the classic monster movies, Frankenstein in particular. The twist on this, and what is so great, is that it takes place in the 70s, and Gene Wilder plays the descendant of the original Victor Frankenstein. And he is a legitimate, respected scientist, and he actually he loses his cool when people bring up the ghost of the past, so to speak. And that's why he tries to get everyone to call him Frankenstein, not Frankenstein. He's trying to distance himself from his disgraced ancestor, if you will. And he ends up, um, well, basically going right down the same path. He creates a monster, and hilarity ensues. I honestly feel like the scene where he's displaying the monster to the public and they do a riff on the classic song Putting on the Ritz might be one of the funniest things I've ever seen. Like I honestly I cannot watch that without just dying of laughter. It is just absolutely brilliant. And apparently they originally didn't want to do it. Peter Boyle thought it would not be a good idea to include that scene, and Mel Brooks like fought hard to get them to film it. So I'm so glad that they did include that because it's just a classic scene in film history. If you've never seen it, there you can just watch that particular scene probably on YouTube. Um, I don't want to do a beat by beat breakdown of the entire movie because it hits a lot of the same tropes as the classic monster movies, but they also, since it's a spoof, it's going to be making fun of them in various ways. But Marty Feldman as Igor, because of course he kind of gives a wink at the camera when he hears Frankenstein pronounce his name as Frankenstein, so he says his name is pronounced Igor. I think Marty Feldman as Igor is just absolutely phenomenal. But truly, I mean, everyone in the cast is great. It's a stellar cast and a phenomenal movie and just a darn good movie, even if it is a loose adaptation of Frankenstein. So, Mel, I guess I'll turn it back over to you for your next one. What else do you have?
Sure. Though I have to say, you got me wanting to rewatch Young Frankenstein for the spooky season. So I'll probably be doing that at some point this month. So my second one is one that I read quite recently. I've been meaning to read it for a while, but when Lisa said we were going to talk at some point about adaptations of Mary Shelley's book, I thought, well, I've had Victor Laval's Destroyer graphic novel from 2018 on the back burner for a while. A student of mine actually talked about it. I believe it was last year or the year before, and got me thinking about it. And I've been meaning to read it. And so, yeah, I had a copy of it and wanted to check it out and took this opportunity to do it. And I enjoyed it. This one, so if The Dark Descent of Elizabeth Frankenstein was kind of the, oh, something happening with another character and the gaps and the background of the original book. Destroyer is basically like it takes place in 2017. And one of the things I thought was really interesting about it when I was perusing it the last week or so, preparing, um, is that as the tagline for the graphic novels is it's the legacy of Frankenstein's monster colliding with the socio-political tensions of present day US. It is, but it's not just like a retelling or parallel story of Frankenstein and the creation of the creature in 2017. It begins with, and I don't think this is too much of a spoiler because it's in the material on the back of the book and in the blurb. It begins with the monster from Mary Shelley's book. Basically, I guess you would say like the ice kind of melted or whatever, and he's back. And the idea is, even though, in the original book, the creature had attempted to kind of connect with humanity, and had those conflicts. Now the creature is just angry, and they call him the Destroyer. So there's this almost like shadow scientific kind of government group, and they know about him, and they have like some passwords and stuff to let people know when he's back and that he has to be taken care of, because he's basically gets mad and starts destroying things. And there's been a contingency plan made to deal with this. And so you kind of learn about that. And meanwhile, one of the scientists, Dr. Baker, who had been working on those projects, she is living in isolation, and a couple scientists from the lab are sent to find her and bring her in to help because of her specialization in nanotechnology. She's also a descendant of Victor Frankenstein and has been using his work along with nanotechnology and other, technology to try to continue that idea that was begun in the creature, I guess you would say. And part of the thing that is uh, making her do this, making her pursue these studies and having left the lab, is that her 12-year-old son was murdered by police. It was a instance of police brutality. And that basically changes everything for her with her work for the lab and as a scientist. And that's is when she withdraws and starts her own studies and her own work. And I feel like if I go any further, I'd be spoiling things. But that's kind of the setup, that you have the original creature from Mary Shelley's book that has come back in like 2017, and what would that be and mean? And then you have this descendant, Dr. Baker, who has kind of withdrawn after this terrible, just horrible, violent loss, and dealing with her grief and how that affects her work. And those two parallel stories collide in the course of the graphic novel. So yeah, it's kind of like an extension, but very much dealing with more kind of present day issues, I would say. And then before I throw it to you, Matt, I'm just going to throw out a book that I want to read, and I'm hoping I can read this fall. Is Tim McGregor's Ein Hallow, which came out this year. I picked this up when I was at StokerCon, and I thought it was pretty intriguing. It, like the Dark Descent of Elizabeth Frankenstein, takes place in kind of a gap in the original book. So after the creature has been created and Victor runs off to an island, in this book, there's a character named Agnes, and she and the other islanders are kind of like, what's going on? Who is this dude? And she gets to know Victor. And so it's like this other side to, or what could have happened during that time in the book. So I haven't read Ein Hollow yet, but I heard about it on the She Wore Black podcast, I believe it was, and got some great blurbs. And when I saw it at StokerCon, I was like, I'm going to pick that up and hopefully read it this fall for spooky time. So yeah, my two recommendations, I guess you would say, are The Dark Descent of Elizabeth Frankenstein and Destroyer, and then my I'm going to check it out and looking forward to it pick is McGregor's Ein Hollow. Matt, I know coming up is a wonderful masterpiece of a movie that you you introduced me to so many years ago. I can't wait to hear your description of it.
Why, yes. Why, yes. I know you are already anticipating what is about to be unleashed on this podcast, but again, this is what happens, Lisa, when you leave us unsupervised. So just so you know that. um, and actually, I had a great segue because your last recommendation of The Dark Descent of Elizabeth Frankenstein, like this one, is also set in the modern era. But before I get ahead of myself, I should probably introduce this. I am talking about a loose adaptation of the Frankenstein story, if you will, the 2014 masterpiece of film known as I, Frankenstein. It was written and directed by Stuart Beatty. It was based on a graphic novel by Kevin Brevoux, and it stars Aaron Eckhart, Bill Nighy, Yvonne Strahovski, Miranda Otto, and Socrates Otto. And for those of you who have not seen I, Frankenstein, I cannot undersell how absolutely insane this movie is. And I mean insane in the best way, because I'm quite a connoisseur of bad movies, the fun, watchable bad movies that you watch with friends and make fun of. I grew up on Mystery Science Theater 3000. I love watching bad movies, as Mel can attest. We both are fans. And this is one of them. Um, I don't think that it is underselling it to say that this is what would happen if you summed up the plot of the book Frankenstein in about 5 to 10 minutes and then had a complete fever dream of a movie for another 90. If that makes sense. It literally completely rehashes the plot of Frankenstein, Dr. Victor Frankenstein creating the monster uh, surviving being destroyed and killing his wife. He chases it to the Arctic. This all happens in about 5 to 10 minutes worth of narration. Um, the monster ends up in the Arctic, and Victor succumbs to the cold weather and dies. So the monster returns home to bury Frankenstein and is attacked by demons. And then he, in this attack, is rescued by two gargoyles who explain to him that they were created by the archangel Michael to battle demons and protect humanity. They invite him to join them, and he declines, but they give him these baton like weapon to protect himself that allows him to kill the demons. And for the next 200 years, he lives apart from society and kills any demons that he comes across. And then in the modern era, decides to rejoin society. This is in the first 15 minutes of the movie, I would like to remind you. This is all just setting up the plot of this film. I'm not going to do a beat by beat breakdown of it. I will just say that if you're intrigued by what I've said so far, it gets even crazier than that. But again, Frankenstein's monster is rescued by living gargoyles and in brought into a ongoing war between them and demons from hell. If you've ever wanted to see that plot played out in cinema, this movie has got you covered. It is
I mean, who hasn't wanted that, really? I mean,
right. It is. I mean, it answered a question I didn't even know I needed to ask. That's what this movie did for me, at least. And yeah, I subjected Mel to this many years ago, and we've talked about it quite fondly since then. I do want to stress this is not a good movie. It's not good in the traditional sense. It is a fun movie that makes you go, "What?" about 3 or 4 times a minute because it's just all over the place. And if you didn't recognize the name of one of the actors, Miranda Otto, she was in The Lord of the Rings. She played Eowyn. So you'll be watching this and you'll go, "Oh, that's Aaron Eckhart, that guy who was Two-Face in The Dark Knight." And oh, there's Bill Nye. He's in like everything. And then there's Eowyn from Lord of the Rings, and you just wonder what they were thinking. But I guess everybody needs to eat, so I'm not going to shame them for taking this film on, because if they had passed on it, this film might not have been made, and we would be the lesser for it. But again, it's absolutely bananas in all of the best ways. There's a climactic huge, humongous battle about 30 or so minutes into the movie. And I wish I was exaggerating this, but I legitimately checked my watch the first time I saw it and said, "This movie has only been going for like 30 minutes. This feels like the final battle scene from other films." So it's a glorious mess. That's really all I could say. It's an absolute glorious mess. And I really was just kind of shoehorning it in here because of Frankenstein, because I wanted to talk about I Frankenstein, because it's just absolute bananas and I love it so very much. But in keeping with the adaptation of Frankenstein, it does keep that in the first couple of minutes of the film, and then creates its own plot that is quite mystifying and beguiling, and will definitely have you saying what quite often. But I mean, it's got Bill Nye chewing the scenery, and Aaron Eckhart gives a pretty decent performance given what's what he's in and the level of writing that it is. So yeah, I hesitate to call it a recommendation, but that's my final pick for this discussion of adaptations of Frankenstein. So I guess I will go ahead and just round us out here, we are at No Fearcast on Twitter and Instagram, and we also have a Facebook page. Our email is nofearcast@gmail.com. And if you love what we're doing, you can consider supporting us on Patreon. We also have merchandise available at our website, nofearcast.com. Or you can simply rate and review us. It's entirely free and it helps other listeners to find us. Theme music is by Nicholas Gasparini. We will be back in 2 weeks with a brand new episode.